most important things in my preparation is that I try to never play it wrong.
Ooh.
I try. Now that's the operative word.
Okay.
I try to never play it wrong.
Mm-hmm. Hello and welcome back to Confident Musicianing. Boy, do we have a treat today because we are talking with Dr. Jason Worzbyt. Dr. Worzbyt is the professor of bassoon and director of adult and community bands at Indiana University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Worzbyt has performed and recorded and has been featured as a soloist with wind ensembles and orchestras all across the country. He has premiered many works, including Bruce Yurko's Concerto for Bassoon and Wind Ensemble, and Bruce Yurko's Concerto No. 2 for Bassoon and Wind Orchestra. Dr. Worzbyt has presented multiple clinics on bassoon at the Midwest Band and Orchestra Clinic, the American Band College, as well as the State Music Education Associations for Pennsylvania, Maryland, New Jersey, Iowa, South Dakota, Idaho, and Colorado. Wow, that is a lot. He also has many insightful bassoon, conducting, and musical articles on his website and has conducted the Indiana All-State Band, Indiana Junior High All-State Band, New Jersey All-State Symphonic Band, and the PMEA, that is Pennsylvania All-State Orchestra. He has formerly served as the president and higher education representative of PMEA District 3 and continues to serve this organization as an adjudicator, guest conductor, and clinician. Dr. Worzbyt, welcome to the show.
You know, when you say all that, I think I'm going to go take a nap now. It's great to be here, Eleanor. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. Let's dive right in. One of the things that really, I really was excited about when I did some research on you is your premieres with, your premieres of the pieces by Bruce Yurko. What makes you so drawn to his pieces and specifically performing their premieres?
So this goes back to kind of like being at the right place at the right time. I was a second-year graduate student at the University of North Texas. It would have been, I think, the fall of 1995. And I was doing in the middle of my master's in conducting degree, and my dear teacher, Gene Corporon, came to me and he goes, "How would you like to conduct a world premiere?" And of course, absolutely. So he gave me this piece called In Memoriam Christina for wind ensemble by Bruce Yurko. I had never heard of Bruce's music. I had never met him or really heard of him. And so began to work on this piece with one of the ensembles at North Texas, and I was just immediately drawn to his writing and the sounds that he got out of the band, and we did the premiere, and then I later had the opportunity to talk with him on the phone a little bit. And unbeknownst to me, that not only were he and Gene Corporon good friends, but also good friends with another one of my conducting teachers, Jack Stamp, which also was going to be one of my dear colleagues and dear friends at IUP. Mm-hmm. So when I got the job at IUP, Bruce and I had stayed in touch, and so when I got the job at IUP, the Keystone Wind Ensemble had been selected to perform at the 2001 College Band Directors Conference, and Jack Stamp said to me, "Why don't you commission Bruce and we'll premiere a bassoon concerto?" And so that's what we did. I got a grant, and we premiered the concerto down in Denton, Texas. Mm-hmm. Well, fast forward, I don't know how many years later, no, it was 2014, when Jack was getting ready to retire, and we had never done a studio recording of the concerto, and I said to Bruce, and by that point, Bruce and I had become dear friends. I conducted a lot of his music. I said, we're getting ready, Jack's getting ready to retire. I'd like to do a studio recording of your concerto. And he thought a little bit. He goes, "Well, let me write you another one." And so he wrote me this 14-minute concerto for free. He didn't charge me a cent. And so we ended up premiering it and recording it the year that Jack retired. And so Bruce has just been a dear friend, just a
Mm-hmm.
dear friend. And he and I have had the opportunity to hang out quite a bit. I've done quite a bit of his music here. He's comes to campus quite frequently to hear performances, and so
Mm-hmm.
just one of the complete musicians that I know.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. That, I mean, you bring up so many good points with that, especially like being in the right place at the right time and also staying in touch with people who you have met because you never know when like later opportunities and later possibilities can happen. That is not only like inspiring but also really insightful into um, just networking, just keeping in
Well, and
touch.
oh, absolutely. There's people think it's who you know, and that's actually incorrect.
Hmm.
It's not who you know; it's who knows you.
Mm.
That's the way that works. And the music world is very small.
Mm-hmm.
I think about how I got my first college job at Morehead State University. I applied to this little tiny school, good school, really school in this tiny town of Morehead, Kentucky, which is in the middle of the Daniel Boone National Forest. Wonderful university, wonderful people. Unbeknownst to me, when I applied for the bassoon job,
Mm-hmm.
that I had about 5 direct connections to that school that I didn't even know about.
Wow. Yeah.
It was I didn't my first bassoon teacher at North Texas knew the trombone teacher. The one of the composition professors at North Texas knew the trombone teacher.
Mm-hmm.
The one of the flute teachers at North Texas knew the clarinet teacher. Gene Corporon knew the director of bands. Jack Stant knew the director of bands.
Mm.
The associate director of bands was an IUP alum. I mean, I had no idea about any of this
Yeah.
when I submitted my application.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
you never know what happens with these connections.
Mm-hmm. 100%. I think that is something, especially, I mean, for me as a young musician, also for our listeners as young musicians, to really just remember the world is small. The music world is so small. And just, knowing people, having connections, and also how you said, it's not who you know, it's who knows you. That's something that I haven't actually thought about. And when you said that, I mean, I feel like I need to put that on my wall or something, like that is that is
Well,
so
I mean,
important.
it's kind of like, Jack Stamp always talked about when we would perform,
Mm-hmm.
he would say to all of us, you never know who's listening.
Mm.
And it's absolutely true. Here's another case of this. When I was at my last year in graduate school, we got to play at the College Band Directors Conference. It was at 1997 in Athens, Georgia, University of Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
And in the audience at this performance was a member of the bassoon search committee at Morehead State.
Wow.
And I got a chance to meet this person. Her
Mm-hmm.
name was Sue Cressup. She just retired a couple of years ago. Fantastic music educator. I got a chance to talk with her the next day
Mm-hmm.
after she had heard the performance. So, I mean, you never know how these things are going to work.
Yeah, no, 100%, 100%. I think this ties right into our next I guess question, which is talking all about like you being an adjudicator for PMEA, that is Pennsylvania. And the question for you is how are high school student auditioners compared to university level musicians when they audition? And can you give us maybe like 3 tips or pieces of advice for high school students preparing for any auditions that they have coming up?
Okay. I'll take the last one first.
Okay.
So, like, so when you're like preparing for an audition, what do you want to do? Okay. You're going to get as many different answers for this as you are people that you would interview. So I'm going to give you, but on the other hand, I will tell you, as an ensemble director, I have heard probably thousands of auditions over the years for for ensemble placement. So for me, if I was going to prioritize things, I really prioritize rhythm just above everything else.
Okay.
is that because you can have the most beautiful sound, you can have impeccable intonation, you can just have you can have the most critical understanding of what you're playing, but if there's no rhythmic construct to it,
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be hard for anyone to fit into a solo or an ensemble situation. It's going to be very, very difficult to do that,
Mm-hmm.
because sound will always impact the listener first. There's nothing you can change about that. The type of sound or the sound that comes out of our instrument voice or whatever, that is always going to impact the listener first, and there's not much we can do about that.
Mm-hmm.
But soon after that, there's this element of time that really kind of pulls everything together. And so I listen a lot for rhythm.
Mm-hmm.
Then I would say after that, I prioritize sound.
Okay.
The type of, and I think it's important to, your sound is going to change throughout your career in many respects, I think, because of the different teachers that you're going to study with. If you're a musician, you're changing equipment and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
When you go through different teachers, but your sound's going to change over time.
Yeah.
But I really think it's always important to be cultivating a sound. And if
Mm-hmm.
I would cross over maybe to what you would ask me about a high school student, I'm reminded of a line that Bob Matchett once asked him. Bob Matchett teaches in the Seneca Valley School District. He's a terrific music educator, and I was watching him teach once, and he asked, this was a middle school band,
Mm-hmm.
and he asked the middle school band, okay, how many of you have a favorite athlete? And they almost all did. Okay, how many of you have a favorite pop singer? And everyone else all did. And so then he looked at the trumpets. He goes, okay, trumpets. Who's your favorite trumpet player?
Mm-hmm.
What's your favorite trumpet sound? And they couldn't answer.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, being able to listen and cultivate the sound that you want is important, but that comes from listening to a lot of sound, a lot of different people,
Yeah.
My teacher, one of my teachers, Gene Corporon, always kind of, with all of his conducting students, had this hierarchy of being in time, being in tone, being in tune, and being in touch.
Mm.
So in time refers to rhythm, in tone refers to tone quality, and then the third one was playing in tune. And it's interesting that he would put playing in tone ahead of playing in tune.
Mm.
But here's the kicker. Most intonation problems, and I think you can almost attach this to anything that you do.
Mm-hmm.
I would even say vocal students as well. Most intonation issues are really tone production issues.
Ah. Okay.
Invariably, when we play out of tune, it's usually a tone production issue. Either we're having reed difficulties, or the fingering isn't. Maybe there's a better fingering that we can use, or maybe there's the embouchure needs to be whatever. But in most cases, they're tone production
Mm-hmm.
issues, and so that's why cultivating a really good sound that's the second tip that I would give. And then I think the third tip is to listen a lot.
Okay.
If you're working on something, don't listen, and this is if you can find a recording, but if you can, don't listen to one, listen to 10.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't know who to listen to, talk to your teacher.
Yeah.
And if you're working on, so like for instance, if you're working on the Mozart oboe concerto, you should listen to as many different recordings of that as you can. But you should also listen to, well, what other music was he working on at the time?
Mm-hmm.
Was he doing any piano concerti? Was he working, what symphonies was he doing? Was he working on any of the big operas?
Mm-hmm.
You should listen to that. Well, were there any other composers during that time that were also writing music for oboe? Well, then you go ahead and listen to that. There's a lot that can be gleaned, I think, from going multiple levels deeper
Mm-hmm.
into what we are working on. And now it's easier than ever.
Yes.
If I mean, Eleanor, I came from a generation where if I wanted to listen to something in depth, I would go up to the music library. I would check out an LP,
Mm-hmm.
not a CD. CDs came a little bit later, and we had some, but it was mostly LPs. And then I had to go into the stacks, find the score. And now, most, if not all, of the standard repertory is on sources like IMSLP or whatever. It's
Mm-hmm.
all out there, and with YouTube, I mean, it's the amount of information that is at a player's fingertips now is it's mind-boggling.
Yeah.
So it's easier than ever now to do that type of in-depth listening.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think. This was I'm blanking at the. It might have been Jascha Heifetz, the very
Okay.
famous violin player. I
Mm-hmm.
think this is he that said this. Someone once asked him, when he goes out on stage, is he 100% prepared? And he goes, well, you really need to be about 200% prepared.
Yes.
you
Yeah.
know,
Uh-huh.
that type of like bulletproof preparation.
Yeah.
So
100%.
and those are good. And you see, all of these are habits that if you start earlier, they're kind of easy to incorporate too.
Yeah, yeah. I think all three of those tips are so, so important, especially listening. Listening is something that I'm working on. I mean, just before we started recording this, I was listening to Mahler's First Symphony because I'm playing it. And I think listening is so extremely important with that as well. And also, one of the tips you were talking about, creating the tone. I know you as a bassoonist can probably relate to this, but something that I'm really focusing on is, taking a reed and creating the tone I want with the reed, not necessarily just taking what the reed gives me, right? Because every oboe reed, and I'm sure this is the same with bassoon, is different, and some of them cooperate more than others. But what I'm really focusing on is kind of just being like, I have this reed and I'm gonna make the sound that I want, and I'm not just gonna put up with what it gives me. So I think the all three of those tips, and the insight in terms of what high school level musicians can do is so, so important. 100%.
Well, and sometimes I think to a degree, if you show as a high school student, college student too,
Mm-hmm.
but as a high school student, if you show initiative to a teacher, most teachers will do anything for you. If you go, no, I'm serious about that. I mean, if you show, because I mean, that was my experience with I think about the teachers that I had in high school
Mm-hmm.
and middle school. I probably had two of the best. I mean, I really won the band director lottery. I mean, I had two just incredible musicians
Yeah.
and when they saw that I was really kind of taking a serious interest, they would do anything for me. They
Mm-hmm.
gave up between giving up extra time to help me with things and turning me on to recordings and stuff like that. Showing initiative to a teacher, I think, is just incredibly important. They'll do anything for you.
Yeah, I mean, I've had experience with that, especially applying for university. I applied to 12 different schools in 3 different countries, and across the board, when I showed initiative, they got very excited to work
Well,
with
that's
me.
just it, right?
Yeah, yeah, 100%. It actually, talking about like auditioning, things like that, I'd love to kind of just chat a bit about how you audition. What are like 3 things that you always do to prepare for an audition?
Well, that's a great question. Well, only because I haven't done an audition in a while. So
Mm-hmm.
let me kind of spin it this way.
Okay.
How about if this is maybe how I would prepare for a performance? And if you want to think of it as an audition as a performance, which it really is,
Mm-hmm.
so this is what I do.
Okay.
For me, I think one of the most important things in my preparation is that I try to never play it wrong.
Ooh.
I try. Now that's the operative word.
Okay.
I try to never play it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's this, the way our mind works is that, if we are playing music and we make a mistake and we make a digital mistake with our fingers, there's a part of our brain that automatically knows we weren't supposed to do that, but the muscle memory part of our brain thinks that absolutely feels just fabulous and they're going to hang on to it.
Mm-hmm.
So, if I play something correct 19 times out of 20, when I get to the concert, I've probably got a pretty good chance of getting it right.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, if I'm sloppy or non-attentive in my preparation, then that's going to come back to haunt me. Irv Kaufman, who was a cellist and guitarist with the Pittsburgh Symphony for years and taught at IUP in an office right next door to mine, would often say that, and I don't know whether this is his line or he got it from someone, but, we shouldn't practice until we get it right. We should practice until we can't get it wrong.
Yes.
And so for me, if I'm working on something really tricky,
mm-hmm.
and I feel like I just can't, there's no way that I can get it wrong, then I would say then I feel good about that. So that's one of the things that I do in my preparation is that I try just to be sure that, I leave no stone unturned with that.
Mm.
I try to, especially, I sometimes tell my students, I wish you could hear how slow I practice. I practice very, very, very slow sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Painfully slow because of the idiosyncrasies of my instrument. So slow preparation, I think that's one thing. Another thing is to practice musically. And what I mean by that is that I don't separate preparation into technical preparation and then musical preparation. So in other words, I'm not trying to just get my fingers on the right spot and then I add the nuance. That should kind of be streamlined into the process. So when you're practicing, I sometimes liken it to like cross training for so like if you're a triathlete, if you're like a marathon runner, and you may do swimming and you may do bicycling as part of the training for the marathon. You're not doing those events, but they help you.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of think about doing musical cross training. So when I'm practicing something at a slow tempo, I'm trying to play with my best sound. I'm trying to play with my best pitch. If there's musical inflection,
mm-hmm.
I try to put that in. Am I successful with that 100% of the time? No. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that,
mm-hmm.
but I tried as best I can to make that part of the preparation so that I'm streamlining everything. So I'm not just lining up the digital technique in my fingers, but what I'm trying to do is also impart the musical inflection.
Mm.
So that's another thing that I try to do is I try to make sure that all of the fundamentals of what I'm doing are present at the earliest point in the preparation. And then thirdly, just to listen. Listening especially is good for tempi.
Yes.
I find. I think about and I'll use as an example. Earlier this year, I was playing the Francis Poulenc Sinfonietta, which is, if you don't know that piece, it's absolutely fascinating. It's for chamber orchestra. And I listened to several performances, and the tempi were all over the map, even though Poulenc had written it in. So it's like, and I'm glad I did that because it did help my preparation in terms of what to expect.
Yeah.
So if you can listen to quite a few performances, I think it's important to keep listening. Listening just is such a vital part of what we do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. I love how we went back to listening. Everything comes back to listening. I think as well, when you were talking about just practicing, like how you would perform, practicing as best you can in terms of that. I think that is a great way to practice, especially coming up for a performance or an audition. I remember I recently did a competition, and literally the whole week before, what I would do is I put on a song, I dance to the song to get my heart rate up, and then I just perform the pieces. And
Oh, sure.
yeah, and what that did, I realized, I was like, I was thinking about, my auditioning before as a way of like, okay, in the practice room it sounds great. In the audition room, it's gonna sound not as great because I'm nervous, and that's fine. But when I did this exercise and I got my nerves up, I got my heart rate up, and then I practiced it, I was like, well, this is where it is, right? It doesn't really matter. I mean, it does matter, but in terms of this audition, it doesn't really matter where it is when I'm chill, when I'm calm, when I'm not stressed. This is where it is when my heart rate is up. So how do I get it better when my heart rate is up? And I think that completely shifted the way I did that audition for the better. So when you were talking about just practicing how you're going to perform and practicing to the best you can, I couldn't help but think about that experience, because that's, really important. Yeah.
Oh yeah, well, and there's a mindfulness component to it as well. In fact, there are several really wonderful books about mindfulness out there, and they're kind of where it's that type of just kind of being aware of your surroundings and kind of aware how we process data when we play can also really be great. There are two books that immediately come to mind, and you already may be aware of one or both of them. And one of them is called "A Soprano on Her Head" by Eloise Ristad, and then another one is "The Inner Game of Music" by Barry Green. And those are wonderful books that talk about kind of like the mental part of what we do.
Yeah.
Again, my dear teacher Gene Corcoran would always tell us as performers that you cannot evaluate and participate at the same time. And so for me as a performer, then I find that especially if I have something really difficult that I have to play, me being mindful of something that contributes to the musical process is often very helpful. As an example, as wind players, for the most part, trombone's kind of the exception to this, but as wind players, we create the rhythm in our instruments and our fingers. And we actually have total control over that. So for me, when I'm very mindful of how I am programming rhythms from my fingers to the instrument, am I keeping rhythms at the knuckle? And am I doing that? That I found has been an incredible benefit to me. In many ways, because it shows that I do have direct control over this process. Sometimes we feel when we perform that we wish we had control over more of the elements, and that is one thing we try to do in our preparation. But just to have that mindset that we are in direct control of how fast or how slow we play.
Yeah.
Or if I'm concerned about my sound, I will put sometimes all of my awareness into breath support. Am I muscularly supporting my sound? But so that I have some type of a focal point that takes me so that I'm not listening to the noise that's in between my ears.
Yeah, interesting. As well, at least for me, what I feel like how I sound versus how I actually sound, there is a bit of a difference.
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I think, really honing into how I play and what you were talking about with that is so important. I think this kind of segues perfectly into the next thing, which is let's talk a little bit about your website. I had a glance, and there are so many helpful articles about bassoon, about conducting, about just a lot of different elements of music. Do you mind sharing a bit about what made you share these articles and why you started writing them?
Sure. So my father, who passed away at the end of November last year, had been all over me, in a good way, for years about getting a website set up. Because I had started to write when I became the I have written some articles when I was trying to go up for associate professor, full professor tenure. I had done some publishing, but not a lot. And then about 6 years ago, I became I ran for this one office with PMEA, the Band Content Area Chair. And with that
Mm-hmm.
responsibility comes writing quarterly articles. Well, I started writing all these articles, and all of a sudden I started having all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I had also started doing quite a bit of conference presentations around the same time. And my father said, "Look, this stuff isn't doing anyone any good if it's just sitting on your laptop.
Yeah.
You should get a website." And
Mm-hmm.
so the website, that's my father's. I mean, it was my father's idea. And actually had a former student who became a web designer who did it. And so um, it's I try to think of it as service to the profession,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
because none of us that have done, and I'll let people argue whether I've done anything for the profession. That's not me for me. That's not for me to say. But there are people that invested a lot of time in me,
Mm-hmm.
that an inordinate amount of time in me, and serve music ed. And so for me, they become very powerful models
Mm.
for me to emulate. So for me, I just decided that it's like, okay, well, if I really would like to serve the profession
Yeah.
in some small way, and if it can help someone, great. And so that kind of became the impetus
Mm-hmm.
behind it. And I have found, much to my surprise, that and if you had asked me this 15 years ago, I probably wouldn't have said it, but I really enjoy writing. I
Mm.
really enjoy doing music education / band research. I
Mm-hmm.
really, really enjoy it. So it's kind of become another avenue of creativity for me.
Yeah, I can 100% understand that with podcasting, and also every episode that I do on the podcast, I have a blog post that goes with it. I think, when you were talking about just enjoying writing them, I can 100% relate to that. Um, and yeah, I looked at some of the articles that you had, or that you have, and they are really, really insightful. So we will have the link to your website in the show notes, just in case anyone wants to go check that out. And I love how it's kind of a tribute almost, or in memory of your father as well. So I think that is absolutely lovely. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting,
Mm-hmm.
because I also need, since I'm giving a shout out to my father, I feel like I also need to give a shout out to my mother as well. My mother is still living, and I'm what happens when I'm the product where my father was a college professor, and my mother is a kindergarten teacher and reading specialist.
Mm.
So this is what you get when you're raised by two professional educators. And I really won the parent lottery. I tell people that every time that I talk about new parents.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so thankful. I'm not sure, because my father did a lot of writing. In fact, my father finished a book 3 weeks before he died.
Wow.
At
Yeah.
80 at the age of 80 years and 3 months, he finished a book 3 weeks before he died.
Wow.
So I mean, he was a prolific researcher and
Yeah.
writer and conference presenter too. So I mean, I think a lot of the stuff, particularly now
Mm-hmm.
that I'm doing professionally, those are things my father kind of imparted to me.
Mm.
So I mean, I thank my parents every day for what they did, what they did for me, because they were just powerful models.
Yeah, 100%. I think when we have amazing role models, whether that is our parents or a teacher or whomever, that can be so empowering for us as well. So I love that that you mentioned your parents. Um, in terms of like things that you are doing, we are nearing the end of this episode, but in terms of things that you are doing, do you have any projects that you're working on, or any things that we want to maybe just highlight, or let the listeners know about?
Oh wow. Well, at the end of this week, which
Mm-hmm.
is the end of our finals week, I'm actually on sabbatical for the fall semester, which is exciting. And
Oh
so
wow.
my my project is I'm going to be doing a recording of solo bassoon work. So literally unaccompanied bassoon. So I'm going
Wow.
to be doing a recording of that. I think that's in October. That's kind of the big thing. But other than that, I'm just enjoy. So I mean, I'm going to enjoy that, but I'm also just going to enjoy. I think kind of reconnecting
Mm-hmm.
with family and friends, and my reconnecting with my wife and my 14-year-old, and kind of being home just a little bit more because academia is a great career. It's gotten tougher,
Mm-hmm.
especially since the pandemic. Academia has become a tougher place to be.
Mm-hmm.
But that and are you going to the IDRS conference? Are you going to go? Are you going to go out to Flagstaff?
Oh, me, I don't plan to, but is when is it?
That is at the end of July because actually,
Oh.
myself and two of my reed colleagues we're going to be doing a half recital of reed trios out at the Double Reed Conference out in Flagstaff at the end of July. So that's another thing I'm really looking forward to.
Oh wow. No, that is very exciting. So if we have any listeners who are going, they can definitely check that out. Yeah. Sweet. So where can we find you online?
Well, I mean, there's you had mentioned there was that there's my website, and
Mm-hmm.
then I have a faculty page as part of the IUP Department of Music, and there are some other. I think there are some other YouTube clips of me conducting. There's a couple other um, interviews that I've done. I did an interview
Mm-hmm.
with PMEA for their Take Notes series, and then Doug
Oh.
Conrad, who has a really popular podcast series. He had interviewed me, so I'm like a bad penny. I turn up somewhere, you know.
Yeah, well, we will put links to your website and to any other recordings or pages of you in the show notes. So if you, the listener, if you want to check that out, definitely go ahead and do that.
Just in closing, one of the things that I tell everyone that I meet, if I have a captive audience, I'll consider you a captive audience of one right now. Is that musicians and artists are going to be the people that are going to save the world in a world that is incredibly divided, is incredibly angry, and is incredibly anxious. It's the artists and the musicians that are going to find common ground amongst the people. They are the folks, they are the artisans that are literally going to save the world, and that are going to save society.
Mm,
So what we do as musicians is incredibly important, and it goes way beyond the notes that we play in a concert hall.
mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I think that is so important to say. I'm glad that you said that because at the end of the day, like music speaks to who we are, and I think that is so important. So, all right, that is about it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. As always, the all of the links will be in the show notes for this episode, from the blog post that goes to this episode to all the links that Dr. Worzbyt and I talked about. Do yourself a favor and check out those show notes because, let's be honest, there's some really good things in there. And if you want to show your love and support for the Confident Musicianing podcast, make sure you give it a follow. Dr. Worzbyt, thank you so much for being on for an episode. I am so grateful, and I'm sure all of our listeners are as well. All right, well, thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, this was terrific. I appreciate it.